I'm excited about bringing this next guest on because he did a great job covering the Texans for us last year, and we haven't had a returning counter intel person yet. And I want to talk a little SEC, especially SEC Lions here. He does a great job covering that as well. I don't know how he makes all the time, including making time for us, but welcome to the show, Cole.
Yeah, I think it's more so because I have no life. I have nothing else outside of literally working nonstop, and it drives my wife crazy. So that's probably why I'm able to have all the time in the world to do stuff with you guys. But glad to be back on. It's going to be, I think, a fun Thursday afternoon between starters out in Allen Park. And who knows, maybe we'll see a preview of what we can expect down in Santa Clara later in February.
I agree. I'm high on this Texans team. You were a little bit more tempered than I was even last year. You were ultimately right about them. The injury issues and offensive line issues came up to bite them. But I think people are forgetting about Stroud. I think this receiver depth, this is one of the things that I was looking at when I was watching the Texans preseason game this past week here against the Panthers. I feel like this might be the matchup of kind of the two most exciting and deepest receiver rooms in the NFL. And I think a lot of people would probably question that. And there's an argument to be made for probably several others. But as far as AFC and NFC, I like these groups a lot. And I think specifically this Texans group is underrated because they've had some injuries. I think Collins remains underrated, maybe partially because of the injuries, but he's a top tier number one receiver. And I like a lot of these young rookies. I have a feeling you might be high on that room as well.
I'm not as high as you probably, Ryan, when it comes to what the potential is, but I do feel like that there is a lot more continuity and a lot more balance this year, which is a good thing. And I think that was evident because they just traded away John Mechie, who was a player they were very excited about going into camp, but they realized we can only keep 6 to maybe 7 roster spots for that wide receiver room. He is fighting for reps. We want to get back an extra day 3 pick. Let's send him out to Philadelphia, and we feel content that we're not dropping off, which is kind of where they are right now. You bring in a Jalen Noel, the Iowa State wide receiver, who I thought tremendous value in round 3. Over 1,100 receiving yards last season, over 1,000 yards in 2023. Really good in the slot, exceptional burst, doesn't drop many balls, known for that quick twitch mentality that allows him to turn 7 to 8 yard slant patterns into 16, 17 yard gains. And then he has a really good counteractive partner with Jaden Higgins, who was the Texans' first pick with the 34th overall pick when they traded out of the first round. I mean, this is a guy that has great size at 6'4". He's very well known for being a vertical threat. When you look at his numbers and you look at his frame, you think, well, big bodied receiver, and you'd be right. But the other thing is that he has incredible open field speed. 4.3, 4.40 down at the combine back in April. Did a really good job of winning the contested catch balls. He's done a nice job of working in this offense underneath Nick Caley, a first-year play caller as well. So they've joined the party, and it already features 2 veterans. But you already brought up Collins. We'll get to him in a minute. But Christian Kirk, and Kirk for me, Ryan, was always this guy that was maybe a little overvalued, but he was overvalued for the wrong reasons. It was because of he had to play that number 1 role. When he was in Arizona, he was a very good complementary piece. You could expect 700 to 800 receiving yards, 57 to 65 catches, and 6 to 8 touchdowns. And those are good numbers for a quality secondary option. But when he got to Jacksonville, and they signed him to the 4-year lucrative $72 million contract, where he ended up being a guy that you trusted as a 1,000-yard playmaker, and then he gets hurt and he deals with back-to-back season-ending injuries, it kind of sours the way that you view him. Now he's back in an offense where he gets to be that number 2. He gets to work inside the slot. He did a good job of moving the chains twice on Saturday against the Carolina Panthers in coverage, one on a slant pattern, one on a 14-yard comeback as well, finished 23 receiving yards. And then Collins. Collins was on pace to finish as the number 1 wide receiver last season. He was averaging anywhere about 125 to 135 receiving yards per game and 7 to 11 catches before the week 5 hamstring injury that sidelined him for 5 weeks. And he still managed to put up over 1,000 receiving yards, which speaks volume to the role he has in the offense and the trust factor that C.J. Stroud has in him as a vertical passing threat downfield. So he's fully healthy. He has been a really big benefactor, I think, in this new Nick Caley offense, and you saw on fourth down on Saturday against Carolina. This is a team that when they need a big-time play, if 12 is open, 12 is getting the ball, there's no questions asked. And then you got the other guys that are waiting in the wings a little bit. Braxton Berrios adds incredible value on special teams. You also have a very good, I think, ex-receiver and a special teamer, and Xavier Hutchinson. That last wide receiver role that we're going to see them argue with, the opposite of what you have currently on the roster, it's going to be intriguing to see, to say the least. I think that they're underappreciated. I maybe would say underrated. I'm not ready to sell them as a elite wide receiver room. It's a lot of young pieces that you hope are going to take that next jump forward. We're not entirely sure if we're going to see that action when it comes down to game reps.
Well, this is one reason we like you on the show, because you are very tempered about your team, but I guess it works for me to be excited and you to be tempered. That's probably a good balance. But I think you summarized the group very well. As far as Kirk, I'm with you on that, but since he is your number 2 opposite Collins, and then obviously you got Tank Dell, I'm not sure what's the latest on him as far as his injury recovery here.
Yeah, they're not going to rule him out for the season just yet. So the reason that they didn't put him on the season, on the injured reserve to begin the year and only on the NFI list is if they put him on the injured reserve before week 1, he automatically is out for the season. That's just the rule that the NFL has. They still believe that there is an outside shot of him making it back in time for late December, early January if they are to make the playoffs. That being said, I am not putting a lot of stock into Tank Dell playing this year. The average recovery time for an injury that required multiple surgeries with a torn LCL, ACL, MCL, and an actual fractured kneecap is anywhere between 14 to 16 months. So we're talking about a player who, full recovery, would be back around January, mid-January at the earliest based on the time of the injury. And that's if his ability to get ramped up and into practice and into reps is actually going to end up benefiting him. But right now, it's kind of a toss-up. I think that they want to believe he will play, but I'm looking at the season where you have 3 wide receivers that you believe in. Who is that third wide receiver? Is it going to be Jalen Knoll? Is it going to be Jaden Higgins? Is it going to be maybe an Xavier Hutchinson? Whoever that is, you're believing in them over a Tank Dell. Doesn't mean that Tank Dell is not part of the long-term future. They actually still really do believe that Tank could be a benefactor because of the relationship with C.J. Stroud, but it's not going to be this season.
I think that makes the most sense, especially with his playing style. Even if he were able to come back from a physical standpoint, I don't think he's going to be truly healthy and able to run the routes the way he'd like to without an off season and everything, which is usually how a lot of this works here. But he's a very underrated player in my opinion too. I was kind of factoring him into the group, but I'm with you on Noel. I think he looks like a guy with a lot of promise. There was a lot of, I'm curious and I want to cover this more with you in the second segment, but I'm curious what you think of the receiver group as a whole in the draft, especially because there was a decent amount of SEC receivers in there and a lot of receiver depth. Obviously, the Lions picked up an SEC receiver that's gotten a lot of publicity, and I want to make sure to talk about him with you, but Noel and a bunch of the other guys that win in this draft, I feel like this could end up being a pretty stellar receiver class as a whole.
Ryan, I'll push back a little bit. I think it'll be a good receiver class, but I think it'll be a really good receiver class for wide receiver 2s. I think that's kind of the difference. In my opinion, when looking at this draft, I really did like Ted McMillan coming out of Arizona, which is why he was the number 1 wide receiver drafted. But everyone else you look at, whether it be Travis Hunter, who I didn't include him as a wide receiver because he plays both ways, or you throw in Emeka Egbuka, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, Kyle Williams out of Washington State, Isaac Tesla, who was at Arkansas, which, by the way, it's amazing that Arkansas didn't have better production with him last year just because the way he's been looking in camp. This is a really good draft to need that difference maker for a number 1 receiver. So there's a lot of guys that you feel like they can get you around 700 to 800 receiving yards. There's a lot of guys who feel like can average anywhere between 45 to 75 catches. A lot of guys who can get in the end zone 7 or 8 times. But you don't do them as your X factor. Like when I looked at last year's draft, there were 3 guys that I was sold were going to be stellar wide receiver number 1. And one of them was Marvin Harrison Jr., the other one was Brian Thomas Jr., and the other one was Malik Neighbors. And then you throw in Rome Odunze, who a lot of people thought was a wide receiver 1. I thought low-tier wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. every single one of them would have been ranked above every other receiver besides maybe Ted McMillan, who you still would say maybe at most ahead of Rome Odunze. And so that's just the level of wide receivers that you had last season coming out versus this year. It doesn't make them bad. It makes them complementary pieces. I think that's kind of the blessing of when you run an 11 personnel set most of the time, is that you get yourself players who fit certain molds that you're looking for. A speedy, shifty slot option that is known for being a little bit of a smaller frame but can win at the point of attack. That is a Jalen Knoll. A vertical threat on the outside that is able to win his one-on-one battles with pure speed. That's a Kyle Williams for the New England Patriots. I was very high on him coming out of Washington State. You get yourself a big-bodied receiver that can win contested catches. That's an Isaac Tesla. A vertical receiver known for his speed, but also got a pretty good frame and a big, slender body overall. That's a Jaden Higgins. And so there's going to be some really good names that we see in this draft. I don't know if any of them will ever end up living up to the wide receiver one, averaging over 1,000 receiving yards per season, 75 to 85 receptions, 10, 15 touchdowns. But they're all going to be good complementary pieces. I think that's where this draft really shined. You didn't get your go-to guy, but you got yourself a lot of good difference makers that can help elevate that go-to guy.
I agree. I think you did a good job kind of highlighting the fact there were a lot of top-end guys in the last draft. I guess I'm kind of thinking relative to draft value. I think there's going to be a lot of value here in this draft because a lot of the guys that you named were more kind of mid-round picks, and then there were some other guys. I'd be curious to your take on Golden. You didn't mention him, I don't think. It was a longer list, but there's a couple guys that intrigued me. He was obviously a first round pick. I'm not sure that I liked him as much as some of the other guys, but I agree with you on that. I just think there's going to be a lot of value here to be found from a lot of the pieces. But where were you on Golden? I imagine you probably saw him play a decent amount.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great wide receiver one for Texas, but I thought he was a good complementary piece for any organization, which is why, surprisingly, the one place he landed was one of the very few I didn't want to see him go to. And credit for creds, too. You know, you talk about a team that needs to go draft a wide receiver in the first round for the first time in, 22 years, 23 years, and they didn't really have that difference maker. But it did feel like that this wasn't the draft to do so. Now, Golden is probably going to be the number one receiver for Jordan Love, and Love has really talked highly about him, but I don't view him as a consistent 1,000-yard playmaker guy. I view him as a good chain mover, a good third down target on the outside, very good Z receiver that's not going to drop many balls, but he didn't have any elite trait. Now, he was my wide receiver, too, behind Ted McMillan going into this draft because of he had a lot of great traits. Good after the catch. Overall, good catch radius. Tracking skills out the wazoo. Pretty decent speed. A lot of things to like that you want in a complementary piece. But he wasn't elite in any one of those traits. Where Emeka Egbuka was far and away the best route runner. When you talk about the speed, Jalen Knoll was one of the fastest receivers. Kyle Williams was one of the fastest receivers. When you talk about size and physicality, Ted McMillan doesn't drop many balls. And so, you look at a guy like Matthew Golden, you say to yourself, well, he can fit in any offense. He'll be really good, but what is going to be his role long term? This feels like a very high-end number two receiver. He's going to have to step up and be the one. I'm not sold that he is going to be able to take over games the way that Green Bay envisions him to, which basically is what they've been kind of hoping for like a Christian Watson, for a Jalen Reed, for all of these other guys that are really good number twos. You maybe just drafted the best number two that was in this draft class.
I was just going to say the same thing. It feels like they have a whole squad of number twos at that receiver position there. So that's interesting stuff. But we got to take a quick break. I want you to break down to C.I.A a little bit after the break, since you do watch a lot of SEC, and I want you to kind of break it down for me because I was late to the game on him, but now that I see him, I've talked to him on one of our shows here on the station. I'm curious about your profile of him kind of before the draft, and then now what you're looking at here. But we'll come back here with Cole Thompson of Texans Wire. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Cole Thompson of Texans Wire. He's given us a lot of great stuff so far. Since we've been breaking down the receivers, I'd like to get your breakdown on C.I.A a little bit because admittedly I was a little late to the game on him. I'd heard of him coming out of Hudsonville, Unity Christian here locally. Then he went to Hillsdale, then to Arkansas. And I know the tape was kind of mixed on him, but I'm curious now that I see him. Yes, it's the preseason. I'm not trying to exaggerate that, but given his build, which is definitely an NFL ready build, his willingness to block and do a lot of the little things, the special teams fit, the downfield ability. I talked to him. I did a 30-minute interview with him on our other show here at the station, and he was clearly a very smart kid, very motivated kid. I'm curious why he slipped a little bit and why his projection was towards the later side. And then there were a lot of people, especially here locally, that pushed back on the amount that the Lions gave up for him. I'm not really hearing a lot of that talk anymore after just a few preseason performances.
Tesla was a really weird player because he probably would have been in the third round range and nobody would have said a dang thing if he would have had one more year of eligibility. The thing is that they were breaking in a brand new offense at Arkansas. They were changing some things up with Petrino. It was a new quarterback. It was a new personnel. A lot of moving pieces last year to where he wasn't really able to get comfortable. And if you know anything about Bobby Petrino's offense, the transition from year one to year two for a quarterback and a wide receiver really does benefit a lot of these young players. You look at the success rate that we saw when Lamar Jackson was running the show at Louisville. He had a good first season, won the Heisman Trophy in year two. Year three, he was once again in the All-American conversation. That's the type of player that you probably are going to see from a Taylor Green this year, and Tesla would have probably benefited from it because of just the continuity and understanding of what his role was. He was a vertical threat last season, had a couple of big explosive plays, had a big-time catch in the matchup against Tennessee last year, had a couple of moments against LSU in the first half. So there's a role for him. He wins with size. I mean, he's a 6'4", 6'5" wide receiver that can get a lot of contested balls and turn a lot of catch balls into more so beneficial in his favor. So things like that. It was very much a project player. But, the thing with Brad Holmes is he's noticed this since the get-go. I'm going to go take a player that I just view as a really talented prospect, and damn where we get the player or what the asking price is or what we're going to say. And the thing was, Ryan, I think a lot of people would have understood him as a mid-round pick if it didn't cost you 3 third-round picks to move up and get him. I think that was really the shocking point with several of the other receivers on the board, with other potential options. You could have gotten a cornerback, you could have gone after a linebacker, you could have gotten in the interior defensive line depth, and you went after a wide receiver that had limited production. But that's just kind of the beauty of the scouting department, and I think it's a major reason why Detroit is in the position it is right now. They target guys that they know are going to end up being fixtures and really stellar prospects, even if they don't end up handing out week 1 or week 17, year 1, and they get to year 2 or year 3. That's been kind of that's been kind of Brad Holmes' blessing, is his ability to understand what type of talent he wants and not being afraid to pull the trigger to land them. And so far, it's looked really beneficial. The argument going into camp was, where does Tesla fit? He's probably going to make the roster, but do we feel like that, we're going to have a Tim Patrick still competing over him and that we'll throw him down as wide receiver 6? I don't think that's the case. I think that Tim Patrick, 31 years old, guy who has no longer shown that he can stay active for a full 17-game season, he is kind of the he is kind of the reciprocator of the success of Tesla. You're getting a player that has eerily similar traits, has a lot of high upside, has all the potential in the world to be a quality wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3, to pair alongside with Jameson Williams and with Amon-Ra St. Brown and even Sam Laporta. I think it's was he going to play right guard, left guard? Were you going to see reps at center? Was he going to have to just be that everyman swing tackle? And then when you lose the center, who, Ryan, let's just be real. This may have been the best center in the NFL. To retirement that just decided to kind of make it unknown after the draft. It definitely put a wince in your position. Ratledge, I think, is a guy that a lot of people really did like as a day 2 player. I really liked him as a round 3 player, but you took him in round 2 because if you realize he's not going to be there in round 3, so we kind of got to take him now. The reason that we're taking him is to let him sit for a year, figure things out, and then we'll go from there. Now you need him to be really beneficial. And again, this was a big reason why when they were going into when they were going into the early stages of training camp and they were getting ready for that first game, I think it was the Hall of Fame game, they were like, we need to make sure that he is signed on the dotted line. And damn the fully guaranteed contract, he is a player that we cannot afford to have missing time and missing reps. He needs to be out there. He needs to be fully active. He needs to be getting this time and having a big-time role. Tesla was one to where, again, going into this season, what really is going to be his role? Are you asking him to do more than Jameson Williams? Probably not. Are you asking him to do more than Amon-Ra St. Brown? Probably not. Do you think that he could be a quality name that you can continue to blossom into that wide receiver 4 that turns into a wide receiver 3 that eventually maybe is a reason why you feel comfortable letting Jameson Williams walk if you don't want to spend the money for him? Perhaps, but he is definitely a guy that I think you're looking at for more of a long-term play. The Tyleik Williams move is going to be the one that I'm really intrigued with because of the injuries on the defensive line. I'm already blanking on who was the guy that's out for the year, that you put him on the IR at the beginning of the season. That was probably somebody that you had to go ahead and have like that exponential role for him. You did get some depth this offseason when it came to the free agency market, so you didn't hit that much of a reset, but Tyleik, I think, is going to have a bigger role. I do think that he was one of those names that you look at the end of round 1, fit kind of the criteria of the defense that you want for a Dan Campbell-led squad, even though you are kind of starting over, not really because of Aaron Glenn's departure for New York. He's a guy that is a good two-gap player. Overall, a solid run defender, fits that mold of what you kind of want to pair alongside with Alan McNeil for the long term, Levi Ozariki for this upcoming season, like those little things. That's kind of like where you have the Tyleik Williams. So there's a movement where the younger guys are going to have bigger roles for a team that was fresh off of having the number 1 seed and probably was built to go win a Super Bowl last season, because that's usually the end goal, is that these guys you kind of slowly break on in. But I don't put a lot of pressure on them to be the difference makers. I put a lot more pressure on guys you re-sign, guys that you expect to get a massive payday, like an Aiden Hutchinson, or guys that you think could be here for the long haul, were a first-round pick last season, like Tyrion Owens. Those are the guys I think face a lot more pressure and are going to have to live up to expectations than these other young cats.
I agree. And those guys that they picked will hopefully just be kind of windfall gains here. But it'll be interesting to see. I'm interested in the matchup with the Texans. I'm interested in the Texans in general. We're going to have Cole back on next week to review the game with us and talk about things that he found interesting. But tell the people where they can follow you in the meantime here, Cole.
Yeah, if you want to give me give our website a look, it's at Texans Wire. If you want to give us a follow on social media, it's at the Texans Wire, at Mr. Cole Thompson. And if you want to check out my YouTube channel where it's on college football every single day, it's at SEC Unfiltered. We go through a lot of different content, and usually it's a lot of SEC players, but from time to time we will break down the Big Ten, the ACC, and of course Michigan plays week 2 out in Norman, Oklahoma. We're going to be breaking down a lot of different guests coming on that week for everything you need to know about the Wolverines versus the Sooners.
He has great coverage, as you can tell by the interview. He covers a lot of things very well. So we're happy you could join us on the show, and we'll look forward to talking with you next week.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care, guys.
All right. Thanks, Cole.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Encore Business Group, and Rydan Investments.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.